Okay, so today we will be discussing the gut dysbiosis, which is the disbalance in the microbiota, and how this relates specifically to cardiovascular disease. And so we will start with some definitions, and then we'll move on to how microbiota would affect the system, the health system, in terms of cardiovascular disease. So for those that are new to this series, the gastrointestinal tract, also known as gut, starts from the oral cavity to the anus. It is an external tube inside of us. It starts from the mouth, oral cavity, to the esophagus, and leads to the stomach. From the stomach goes to the small intestines, and then to the ascending colon, transverse, and descending colon towards the rectum and the anus. Okay. So these are the different parts of the digestive tract. There are other organs that are associated with production of specific enzymes and also production of bile from the liver as an emulsifier of fats. And the physiology of gut can be found in one of our health talks, our first few health talks. But the importance here is that although the main function of the gastrointestinal tract is to digest food and absorb nutrients, we've learned that there are various other functions, including it's an immune learning hub. Okay, so immune cells learn about potential threats in the environment through the intestinal tract. There is also the production of neurotransmitters and hormones. Okay? And there is also the provision of essential and beneficial microbiota. So within the large intestines, we also mentioned numbers. There are around 100 trillion bacteria which are beneficial for our health. And they are beneficial because they produce a number of substances which we call metabolites that are beneficial, although today we also mention some of these substances that can be also harmful to our system. So the gut and the microbiota within it are important for digestion and absorption in terms of metabolism. It's extremely important for immune function in terms of defense and tolerance, and also important in terms of satiety, mood, and pain through a direct connection with the brain. So there is also the gut-brain crosstalk. Unfortunately, in terms of gut microbiota in our intestines, we know that there is disbalance in specific diseases and also pre-diseases. And that disbalance is called gut dysbiosis. It affects various systems and results in different diseases. And here is in the image, you can see that gut dysbiosis can result in inflammatory bowel disease. It's also important in irritable bowel syndrome, important in obesity and type 2 diabetes in terms of metabolic diseases. Other neurological diseases, including anxiety and depression, involved in hypothyroidism, in autoimmune disease. But today we're going to discuss how this disbalance in microbiota, which we call dysbiosis, also results in cardiovascular disease. We'll mention the term atherosclerosis, and this is when the arteries start to be blocked. Okay, I will show you also an image in a later slide. We know that there are several diet-induced pathologies, therefore, okay, and today we exemplify this by the symptoms of atherosclerosis in response to specific diets. But definitely there is a direct link. So the microbiota is an intermediary between the diet and the host physiology. Okay, so if you think about the gut, which is an empty tube, the empty space, we call it the lumen. In the lumen of the gut, there are these 100 trillion microbiota living in only the large intestines, for instance. And we have also learned throughout this series that these microbiota are important to convert specific chemicals to health-promoting substances. We've mentioned the conversion of bile acids into secondary bile acids, a very important aspect in irritable bowel syndrome. In terms of health, general health, the fermentation of carbohydrates towards short-chain fatty acids, such as butyrate. And then we have also the production of different bioactive compounds, and we'll mention a couple of these today in terms of cardiovascular disease. And there's also conversion of substances that are important in immunomodulatory systems, which means that they modulate the immune cells, and also the production of specific substances from amino acids that would result in, for instance, neurotransmitters such as serotonin, which is produced by tryptophan through the action of specific bacteria in our large intestines. Okay, but of course, these bacteria also would produce toxins and polysaccharides that can harm the tissues beneath. And here we talk as well about inflammation of the intestines. Today, we will mainly talk about cardiovascular disease, and one of the main bioactive compounds which is associated with the risk of cardiovascular disease is this molecule called trimethylamine N-oxide, which as from now, we're going to indicate this as TMAO. TMAO, therefore, is a bioactive compound associated with high risk of cardiovascular disease. Hence, in this case, it is a compound which is necessary, but at very high levels, it becomes a risk for health. It's also important to indicate that throughout the first series, we mentioned mainly health-promoting substances from microbiota, like short-chain fatty acids, which are depicted here in green boxes, and their functions. But TMAO, at very high levels, it is associated with various issues, including increased lipid levels that are not beneficial, and increased oxidative stress in cells. It is also inducing pro-inflammation, so it induces inflammation in terms of increasing cytokine use, and therefore altogether it would result in cardiovascular risk. It doesn't act alone, okay? So if you look at this image, which might be quite complex, but this shows that it is an interaction of metabolites that would result in atherosclerosis. So if I start with the middle top, there is atherosclerosis. This is an image showing what atherosclerosis is. Basically, you have induction of these foam cell formation here, and then you would have accumulation of material due to platelet activation, and therefore you block the artery. Okay. Now, to have this, you need various components. First of all, you need to have high levels of TMAO, okay, which is important in cholesterol transport and foam cell formation, but also important in platelet activation. There are other metabolites, and I will mention another one in a few slides. So TMAO is a conversion of a particular molecule by the liver, and that molecule is TMA, which comes from diets that are high in choline and L-carnitine. So anything which is high in these ingredients will produce TMA, which eventually converted to TMAO. We've mentioned butyrate, so low dietary fiber would result in low butyrate. That would result in dysbiosis, so this disbalance in bacteria and the intestines. Okay, here I'm showing the gut lining in terms of a one-cell tick. If there is dysbiosis, there is entrance of inflammatory compounds. Also, there is lack of production of anti-inflammatory compounds as well. Okay, and due to this permeability, polysaccharides from the bacteria and also bacteria themselves will enter, and that would create inflammation. Inflammation provides cytokines and chemicals basically, that together with the presence of TMAO would result in atherosclerosis, which can lead to heart issues. So here what I wanted to say with this particular slide, that there are various players that worked together to have a problem with CVD. Okay? And they are related in this case to food. So, okay, we mentioned, so if you go, this is like different components, different metabolites that are produced by microbiota that are associated with heart disease. Okay, we mentioned the top left part, okay, choline, TMA, presence of TMAO, thrombosis, and also inflammation, and of course atherosclerosis. We mentioned, for instance, the activation of platelets that are important in the atherosclerosis mechanism and also thrombosis. That's a chemical called PAG. Okay? So there are other metabolites that are produced in microbiota that also supports atherosclerosis. And then there are other, of course, issues. The production of LPS polysaccharides that would result in inflammation. Low production of SCF is also a problem in case of CVD. Okay, but there are others. Okay, so the conversion of bile acids also important to be there. Okay, and additional bioactive compounds that would result in renal dysfunction. Why is this associated? Because if there are compounds that result in renal dysfunction, then TMAO is not excreted. Okay, so then there is accumulation of TMAO in our system, and therefore the problem with atherosclerosis. So they work together, although they work on a different organ. These organs are important to be working in an efficient way to remove toxins, such as excretion of TMAO by the kidneys. When I say renal, we're talking about the kidneys. You see the image there. Okay, so it's a quite complex, and this just shows the active compounds that are produced by the microbiota that act together towards such a condition. So as I said, we mentioned TMAO. So TMAO would have different functions. It affects different cells and affects macrophages, but also liver. So it reduces bile acid secretion. It reverses the transport of cholesterol, and this would result in foam cell production. It also affects cells which are lining the vessels, the arteries, which are called the endothelium, and it increases inflammation and permeability and also oxidative stress, which result in endothelial dysfunction, which is the arterial wall dysfunction, and also activate platelets that would result in thrombus. Okay, platelets would put a thrombus together. all these factors together would result in atherosclerosis and thrombosis. I'm not going into detail about this particular metabolite, but I mentioned a metabolite called PAG, also produced by the liver through the consumption of dietary proteins having a high level of phenylalanine as an amino acid, converted again by the microbiota towards PAG. It stimulates platelets to produce thrombi. Okay, so that is extremely important in heart disease because platelet aggregation and thrombi are associated with heart attack, stroke, and of course is lethal. So I've mentioned the metabolites, how they work together. There are various pillars of lifestyle medicine. Okay, nutrition is one of them, and I will delve into some information about nutrition regarding associated with TMAO. But of course, nutrition doesn't work alone. One needs to have a good level of exercise. Sleep should be not deprived, management of stress, take care of substance use, sexual health and fertility, social connection, and environmental exposure. So these are all pillars that we need to work on for a healthy lifestyle. Okay, but I'm going to now focus on nutrition and TMAO. There are various sources of TMA, which is the compound which moves into the bloodstream towards the liver and is converted to a TMAO. And all these compounds that you see here, choline, betaine, L-carnitin, okay, and others, are converted by enzymes that are present in the microbiota. If you remember, in the first sessions, we stated that the microbiota, we're talking about more than 5,000 species in there. So the enzymatic repertoire in the intestines is amplified because of the presence of the bacteria, because they have these particular enzymes that you can see here, all right, that are only present in bacteria, and therefore these compounds can be converted to TMA. Now, TMA is converted by the liver to TMAO. Normal physiology would say that if it is in the right amount, it can be converted for excretion in the kidney. So that would be a normal process. Now, TMAO is also present in fish and seafood directly, so TMAO, and it can also pass through the blood and goes to the kidney and excretion. Okay, so this would be the normal physiology. Okay. The problem is that if we have high levels of TMAO, then it would result, as we said, is associated with CVD. Now, a very interesting point here, once you might ask what fish are very beneficial for our health, and therefore they're going to give us TMAO, all right? Yes, I will. The answer to that is that fish doesn't only give us TMAO, but also provide us with specific fatty acids that are converted into different molecules, like this CMBH, which inhibits this CVD, all right? And so inhibits the action of TMAO to produce foam cells, okay? So, so fish are still beneficial, so don't worry about it. Now, it's interesting because fish would have very high TMAO because TMAO is important, okay? So physiologically, it's an important compound. It's just the elevated levels which are worrying. And it is present in fish because the TMAO is important to keep proteins in our cells in a regular structure, a normal structure. Okay, so it's extremely important as a chemical. And in fish that live in very cold conditions, And in deep waters, okay, they require a lot of TMAO to keep their proteins in their cells in the right sort of structure. Okay, so that's why they have high TMAO. Okay, but as I said, they also provide us with the right compounds to eliminate TMAO via the kidney. All right. So, in a nutshell, fish is still healthy. Okay? And the problem is that when we eat a lot of these other food substances, that we have high elevation of TMAO in the absence, for instance, of non-chain omega-3 fatty acids, for instance. Good, and this is a slide which provides you with information about the diets that we need to actually balance the TMAO concentration. So on your left, we have those foods that increase TMAO concentration in the blood, and on the right, the blue part, there is those that reduce the TMAO concentration. Okay, so they are preferred in the diet in terms of CVD and cardiovascular disease. So even fish are divided into two. So there are the red box, so fish that live in very cold, deep waters, one would need to try and avoid. So for instance, giving a very interesting example here, lobster, okay? So lobster living in very cold and deep waters, and they have a very high amounts of TMAO, and also very low in omega-3. So it's important to move to other fish. Okay, so all those fish that live in shallow waters are of course low in TMAO. Then, in terms of plants and other intakes, okay, any foods that increase the production of a specific bacterial class called the Provotella is extremely healthy in terms of CVD, because it decreases choline and it would result in very low amount of TMAO at the end. Any food that supports the growth of firmicutes, a class of bacteria called firmicutes, that those foods are going to increase the TMAO concentration in blood. And here you can see the various examples. So like red meat, milk and eggs, and ultra-processed food. These are definitely going to support the microbiota composition that would increase TMAO in our blood. So also this abundance, as we always say, like the diversity and abundance is extremely important, but it's important to have the diversity, okay? And we can regulate this in terms of dietary interventions. Now, in addition to dietary interventions, we can also regulate this via specific probiotics, and prebiotics are also part of our dietary interventions, okay? But in terms of individuals that have problem with kidneys, for instance, that have a renal dysfunction, and we need to regulate the TMAO levels, one could also utilize inhibitors of both host enzymes, so host meaning human enzymes, and also bacterial enzymes. So this is also a whole field coming up in the near future, where there will be specific targets of enzymes to reduce the TMA production from specific foods. Of course, the best thing is always the middle, diet and prebiotics and probiotics, okay? Because with that will regulate the TMAO levels. Okay? In extreme cases, today even there is fecal transplantation to regain sort of the Provotella phenotype, the enterotype. If one would gain the Provotella enterotype and reduce the firmicutes via fecal microbial transplantation, that is definitely what is required in terms of regulating these bioactive compounds that are generated by our microbial friends. Okay, so that was an overview of microbiota, how they are related with diet, and the importance of associations with CVD. Oops. And as I always say, I mean, important that we regulate microbiota. We also mentioned that we need to regulate also lipid balance. As I said before, like fish having omega-3 is extremely important in regulating also TMAO levels. And lifestyle interventions we mentioned are the 7 pillars that we need to utilize. And using all this together, we resolve the intestinal inflammation. And if I would like to also point out at the beginning, we said that this is an interaction between different metabolites, and inflammation plays a crucial role in atherosclerosis and CVD, in cardiovascular diseases. Okay? So it's important. That's why I always work with the trio here: microbiota, lipid balance, and lifestyle interventions. Now, to conclude, I repeat specific slides from the first data. So I put a definition of dysbiosis. We need to have a good balance of our bacteria. Otherwise, this is associated with various things. Today, we looked into cardiovascular disease. Dysbiosis index is important to actually regulate such dysbalances. In terms of a score of 1 to 2 is non-dysbiotic, but we do find around 16% of healthy population to have mild dysbiosis, which is level 3. Okay, so it's important to check the dysbiotic index so that we revert dysbiosis at level 3 towards 2, and then eventually getting a score of 1. 80% of irritable bowel syndrome individuals have a dysbiosis score more than 2, so it's in general 3, and 4 and 5 are associated with inflammatory bowel disease. So because these are severe dysbiotic. We mentioned various bacteria in the first series that we can actually collect them into functional profiles here. Okay, of course, we know bacteria that produce the chemicals, and we can actually indicate which ones are associated with the dysbiosis. Here I see a picture where there's low levels of butyrate producers, therefore butyrate needs to be provided, and in the interim, also bacteria should be rebalanced towards butyrate producers via prebiotics and supplementation and dietary interventions. Okay? There are bacteria associated with gut mucosa, which needs to be also rebalanced. Specific bacteria that are important for gut health, like F. prosnitzi, needs to be in place as well. But also we need to pay attention to our pro-inflammatory bacteria. We also have another functional profile, which we don't see in this slide, which is diversity. Diversity is an extremely important aspect. If we don't have the diversity, it's very difficult to restore a dysbiosis index. So yes, it's possible to restore it. We have to take care of our lipid imbalances. Vitamins are extremely important. Also, we've shown that most microbiota produce vitamins, such as K2, but vitamin D3 is important in the tight junctions for the cell lining, gut lining integrity. Okay, so it's good to measure. You understand what the cause is, and we rebalance. And that's the presentation today. Let me